we all know how this industry works. They just chose not to pay me. I was staring at the prospect of about £2,000 worth of legal costs. Had the job been closer to home, maybe, or had I not spent any money on it, maybe I may have let it go, or I may have accepted a lower offer. But just the sheer audacity to lowball me to begin with.
Jamie Tavu'i is a plant operator of Polynesian descent. He's a husband, a father, and a dozer operator. But as you're about to hear, he is also the David that took on a Goliath and won. Like so many of his fellow equipment operators, Jamie found himself out of pocket, having travelled miles for a job that basically didn't exist. Most working men in that position would have taken that on the chin, but Jamie Tavu'i fought back. Now, I'll warn you in advance, the audio on this is not up to our usual high standards. Jamie was working away and we recorded this over his iPhone. But this story is equal parts compelling and frustrating, and it should be an object lesson to any other plant operators that find themselves in the same position. So this is my discussion with Jamie Tavu'i. Before we even get started, let me make sure I've got your surname right, because
Tavu'i.
Tavu'i, okay.
Yeah.
I know you signed up to my Substack. You, I think you're called the Polynesian plant operator or something like that?
Yeah, the Polynesian planner. So, I don't know if you can see the top there. Background from my dad, Samoan. My father moved to New Zealand, way back, I think it was. Grew up in New Zealand. Yeah, and I suppose the rest is history, really. But that's where the story comes from. And all the way down there on the other side of the world, down in the Pacific Ocean.
So how do you come to be here?
Funny. I mean, of course, week of all weeks, I left the bloody wedding ring at home. So my wife is from the Wirral. I've learned to stop saying she's from Liverpool, which is how we used to describe things when we lived over in Australia, because people over there don't really know the geography of the UK too well, and I was one of them too. So we used to just say she's from Liverpool, and now that I live here, I say she's from Liverpool, and they go whereabouts in the world. But that's how I ended up here. So,
how did you come to be in the plant game?
Yeah, COVID essentially. I was one of those. There's one of those people that a lot of the old heads would talk about. Had no ticket one day, went and said it's been a 1 week course, and came out the other end of the ticket the next. And so during COVID, I used to work in the marketing, communications, mail industry. And then COVID struck and I was made redundant, which I was expecting. We'd just been bought not long prior to COVID, so I knew my job was at risk anyway. And then when COVID came and confirmed that, I had to look around at what I could do next. And on the news, construction was the only industry that was carrying on, essentially. Unfortunately, I wanted to be a chippy, but at Swiftwater was about 30, somewhere around mid-30s, I think. Mortgage, just taking on a mortgage, and couldn't really live off apprenticeship wages. So while I was labouring, a guy that I was labouring with, he said, "Well, what about one of those?" And he pointed to a paddock where there was a digger stockpile and just playing around. And I thought, yeah, I don't mind the look of that. And then when he told me how much they got paid, I was like, yeah, I could live off that sort of money. That's ultimately how I got into the game.
And that was here as opposed to Australia or New Zealand. You're actually here already, yeah?
Yeah. So we landed in April 2015, and then what COVID struck about 2020, wasn't it? So I spent 5 years in the old office job, made redundant, and then career changed into construction. Largely because of.
And I mean, construction is a bit of a nomadic job. I take it you've moved around different sites, different companies, but potentially.
Yeah, lots. It's funny. Being salaried my whole life, so I left school, went into the army. That was so we wanted the job security that provides. And was there for 4 years. Moved to Australia, and then into another salaried job, pretty much. So I was salaried all my adult working life. I came to construction, where everyone's self-employed, scared the hell out of me. But that freedom sort of was quite liberating, and one thing I got quite used to. But yeah, I've enjoyed the travel that comes with the job. It's given me an opportunity to see a lot of the country. Unfortunately, the sort of the drawback with that though is, when your time's wasted, and mine and as is a lot of other people's times, you get sent to jobs as a second choice driver, or plans change, and it doesn't always work out.
And you've got at least one child as well, haven't you?
Yeah. So had our first child this time last year, actually. So their first birthday coming up in a few weeks' time. So, and on top of that, we were doing an extension at the same time. So life's been absolutely chaotic in between. Trying to find jobs around the country too. So had our hands full the last 12 months for sure.
I know when I was younger, that I was working away quite a bit. It's hard work, when you've got wife and young child at home. It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of, I don't want to say it has been helped, but I'll always be a family man first. You've got to do what you've got to do to put bread on the table, right? So, she's only come on the scene in the last 12 months, but I want to be as present as possible, but unfortunately, as we all know, money doesn't grow on trees. So until we win the lottery, you've got to do what you got to do, and from time to time, that's meant working away. Yeah, it's been interesting, the working away element. I sort of up to LinkedIn to try and describe or give people like me, and who weren't from the industry, and insiders to what it's really like it is. I really love being in the seat. Like today, 12-hour shift, single break, but I was just left to my own devices, playing on a batter all day, just pushing it, and it was brilliant fun. But I've always found the challenge to be in between jobs, working with a new agency, and you don't know whether you can trust them, and getting to a site and figuring out whether you're a good fit with the people there. So, it's been an interesting ride.
It's one of the things that nobody ever talks about with agency work. You're constantly the new kid, aren't you? And I've only ever changed jobs. Well, apart from when I went freelance and I was only working myself. When you change jobs and you've got a new bunch of people, that's a challenge in itself. It's quite stressful, right?
Yes, it can be. I feel like I'm sort of as well prepared for that as you can be. So mum and dad split when we were younger, and me and my brother used to spend, between sort of 2 and 4 years with mum, and then we'd bugger off and stay with dad for 2 to 4 years. Dad was a cop as well, so he got posted around different stations, every probably sort of 18 to 24 months. So we grew up moving a lot anyway, and I probably went to over a dozen different schools growing up. So that probably put me in good stead for moving around a lot. And this job, I don't struggle to make friends. Well, I never used to. I'm starting to realise I'm becoming a bit of a grumpy middle-aged man nowadays. But
welcome to my world.
But it's very true. I was when I was in my late teens and 20s, and listening to the older guys, and now the exact same language coming out my mouth. So it's funny how times change.
It's funny you should mention LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is where I found you, and from day one when you started doing videos, they were interesting and engaging. And I'm not saying that to butter you up. And I guess that dates back to your days in marketing. You seem pretty comfortable just chatting to a camera.
Yeah, I think it's probably, I used to people up on pedestals. So and interviewing for jobs, or I would be speaking to someone, even middle management, you can sort of intimidate me. Senior management scared the shit out of me, and owners of companies, like even, witnessing sort of things. But I don't know at what point. It was probably over here at some point. I just, I get hearing, I'm like, they're just people. And if you treat every interaction, just they're just another person. At the end of the day, if you speak to somebody, talk to somebody with respect, we've all seen this cliche floating around on social media. You treat the janitor the same as the CEO, and that's basically, when I speak to anyone or speak on camera, I'm just having everything's just a conversation, right? I try not to get overwhelmed by any sort of sense of occasion or any job role. And, having come to construction, sort of learn that titles, they don't really mean shit. It's the experience, right? So, I mean, I do go hand in hand, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there's university, for example, or some people in senior positions completely out of their depth. That's far from the case, but they aren't the be all and end all. Just, it's just a conversation.
Should be. Now, we've said you're comfortable on camera. I would imagine you're fairly comfortable behind the controls of a dozer. You were way outside your comfort zone just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
We'll come to that part of it, but take me back. I mean, what I'm alluding to is you were in court. How did you come to find yourself in court representing yourself?
Good question. Beyond me, if I'm honest, Mark. But call me naive. I guess I just didn't expect it to get that far. And probably people will rightly so call me naive. Then we had a small claim. What did you expect was going to happen? I just, it's funny because I sort of look back at that experience and, that they used 3 lawyers, and that's probably more of a reflection as to their legal team. I think were based down south somewhere, and so I think it was more a case of they didn't want to travel. So maybe that's how it works in the legal world. They have contacts and they say, "Here's our case. Can you represent us?" I don't know, but ultimately I'd sort of come across 3 different lawyer names. And it would be easy for me to go, I took down 3 lawyers with, Chat GPT and Google, but in my gut the whole time, the strength of my case, and the sense of right and wrong, was what drove me. Ultimately, with support from our little community, because it did get a bit hairy. When I was staring at the prospect of about £2,000 worth of legal costs, my wife and I had a really serious conversation about what to do, and it looked as though I'd kind of been backed into a corner, and I had no choice but to proceed. But how I ended up there, I suppose, is probably more a reflection on the other party, to be honest, because as I say, when you look at the evidence, it was overwhelming. And you don't need to look at the evidence, but we all know how this industry works. They just chose to pay me, which is the right thing to do. And the whole time, I think I look back and there was probably 5 instances where I tried to get this resolved out of court, and there was just no interest in wanting to reciprocate. Well, no reasonable interest. Right? We did mediation, which is sort of encouraged by the court. You're not looked at favourably if you decline mediation, and they came in so low there, which sort of told me that. I know we're getting into sort of the details of it, but the offer that they made at that point in time was so unreasonable, just like everything up to that point had been. So, the morning that it happened, they, I couldn't be, I was absolutely gobsmacked at how quickly the guy I'd been speaking to hung up the phone on me. I said, if there's nothing better you can do, or there's no one else I can speak to resolve this, I'm better off cutting my losses and going home. And they just said, okay, click, and hung up the phone. And I had to take a minute just to sit there and go, did that just really happen? Have I just been sent, about 400 odd miles from home, 5 hours drive, and you've just hung up? Okay. Yeah. So how we got there, I mean, it wasn't really, I mean, I know I filed a small claim, but I have to say we got there because of the other party. Ultimately, there were plenty of opportunities to sort that out of court, and they just weren't interested.
So how did you actually, what were the circumstances? The fact that they didn't pay you, what actually happened that, what was the straw that broke the camel's back between the two of you?
Yeah, so looking back at, so the exchange of text messages, is all sort of commonplace. Everything that, happens hundreds of times up and down the country every day between operators and recruiters. So I'd agreed to a job, bearing in mind that at the time I was on my red card. So I was doing everything I could. I was being overlooked for work locally because of my red card. So, I had to look further afield. So all I'm trying to do is get off this bloody red card and get experience. So agreed on this job. And, there was an allowance there for lodge because I was traveling so far from home, staying away from home. I get down there and I couldn't do an induction. Now, I'd realised this the day before. I'd been sent a pre-registration link. And when I'd completed it, I went back to the guy and I said, look, that link you sent me had an induction date saying the induction date was for 3 days later. So I was at home I contacted them on the Monday, done a lot of the administrative stuff on Tuesday, and travelled down Tuesday afternoon to be at the induction 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. So Tuesday afternoon, by Tuesday midday, I said, look, I've done this pre-registration that you sent me, but I've noticed the induction date says next Monday. And the response was, we'll email them now, but due for tomorrow. So basically, and that was sort of the theme throughout the exchange of messages. I was only ever encouraged to head down there. At no point was I ever discouraged. So I travelled down. I said to him, because of the distance, I'm going to travel down today. So he knew full well I was planning to travel, was going to incur costs, so on and so forth. I get down there, and a couple of minutes before the induction started, I get a message saying, let me know if you get inducted or not. They come back to us saying everything's full. And about 3 minutes later, when they did a roll call and realised they had an extra person, they said, what are you doing here? And I said, I was told to come here. And they said, well, you come back when you're allocated. So I left, got on the phone. Yep, they haven't inducted me. So what do we do now? And at that point, that's when it all sort of started going wrong. So they said, well, I can put you on a DD at a lower rate. And all of this is in that video that I'm grateful that you shared, Mr. Anthony. But yeah, they offered me an alternative role at a lower rate with no lodge. And obviously I said to them, well, that's not what I left home for. So we're back and forth trying to, I said, well, you really should honour the deal you made with me before. So he said, right, I'll give you the rate, but I can't give you the lodge because this guy's not paying lodge. I said, well, that's not my problem. I said, we made an agreement yesterday and I travelled down here under that sort of, under that pretense. And then he come back with some message, but ultimately that he then disclosed to me that he didn't have certainty of my ability to sit that induction anyway. He said, I asked them yesterday, but they didn't get back to me till 10 o'clock, at which point I wasn't in the office. And at that point, that's when I realised, well, hang on, so you never had certainty yourself. You never should have sent me. And anyway, we got to, I said, well, if that's the best you can do for me, I'm better off going home. okay, hang up the phone, took a breath, and then that's when I posted that video. And I uploaded that, traveled home, I think it was maybe about 30 minutes, got into the accommodation, packed up my stuff, and then, well, the hours had passed by then. I think it was about midday, and the phone rings, and it was someone else from the company who'd got wind of the video, and ultimately he then agreed to pay me the original offer that was on the original offer that was made. And bearing in mind, almost 3 hours have passed, and if it weren't for that video, he never would have called me. So I said, look, I've just got no trust or confidence in you anymore. You know, I appreciate you calling, but, and as I said, you know, if I hadn't have made that video, you would never have called. And, you know, having gone through experiences in the past where I haven't been paid from other agencies, that, you know, all things considered, decided to cut my losses and headed home. So that's sort of how that morning unfolded. And then the following day, having slept on it and sort of, you know, spoke to my wife about what had gone on, that's probably the first opportunity I then gave them. I said, I just want to give you an opportunity to make things right and pay me the costs that I've incurred heading down there, and the losses of earnings. And they said, no, we offered this to you yesterday. You've chosen to go home. Hopefully, something along the lines of hopefully, you know, we can work together again in the future, and we can give you the real Flannery experience, something like that. It's a bit weird, bit of a weird response.
So just to be clear, who were you basically in battle with? Was it the agency? Was it Flannery, or was it a combination thereof?
With Flannery. Flannery's own, one of their own recruiters.
Right, okay. Now, I mean, you know, Flannery's a big company. They must be employing thousands of people. You're not the first person that's ever said the way that you've been treated. You know, I mean, we have a guy that watches our show on a regular basis. And on at least 2 different occasions, he's turned up for jobs that didn't even exist. Never mind inductions and everything else. He's turned up. No, we don't need you. You go home again. It should be this hard, should it?
No. And I suppose, I don't suppose that for me was extreme, right? So had the job been closer to home, maybe, you know, had I not spent any money on it, maybe I may have let it go, or I may have accepted a lower offer. But just the sheer audacity, as I said, to lowball me to begin with, and to have to sort of haggle and ultimately pick off and vent on LinkedIn, and you know, thankfully that got traction, I suppose, because ultimately, you know, nothing else may have ever come had I not had that video not got any traction. It's, you know, yeah, you mentioned, you know, the number of people this may have happened to in the past. The job I'm on now, the same individual I dealt with did a similar thing to a guy I'm working with now. Got sent to an induction, did the induction, but then for whatever reason there was no job behind it. So yeah, you know, I think back to that text message, that response I got back about, you know, being given the proper experience, and you know, we all know someone who's had something like this, something similar happen to them. So it is an on, and as I said, because of sort of how much effort I'd gone to, and not to mention the money I'd spent, you know, I was already, as I say, about 350 quid in at that point. Yeah, so I decided after that response, okay, let's see who a judge agrees with ultimately.
It's a daunting thing. I know I spoke to you, you know, via message just before you were due to go into court, and you were representing yourself going in against a proper legal team. And I do wonder, you know, I'm not pointing fingers necessarily at Flannery. I'm talking about the industry in general. There does seem to be this belief that, you know, we're a big company, we've got a legal team, we've got millions in the bank, and frankly, we can get away with things like this. And you you've got to risk basically losing even more money, potentially in the award of court costs, if you want to get your money back.
Yeah, 100%. And that's largely true. So I needed to take 2 days off work. So there was a separate hearing for a separate matter that they put forward in their defence. So that was a day off work because the hearing time fell right in the middle of the day, and obviously I can't sort of be machine needs to be running, so that cost me a full day's pay, and then the hearing itself was another full day's pay. I got back one of those 2 days, but that cost was capped, so I still lost out there. And as you said, the legal representative, we're not lawyers, we're plant operators, the Sparkies, Scappies, Roofers, so the amount of time I spent, Googling stuff, and inadvertently lodging a separate application, which only having done that, when I realised I didn't need to, and that cost me some money as well. So, all things considered, I probably it was the settlement, well, not the settlement, the judgment, which interestingly, coincidentally, I received today. So it's it's the money's landed in my account and the judgment's done. So it's all put to bed now. But all things considered, I'd probably still at a loss if I think the money I would have made, because who knows how long that job would have run for, had things gone to plan. But the money I've spent and money I've lost against the proceeds, well, I don't even know what they were, the quantum or something like that, I think it's called. But ultimately, I think it's probably, a win in the sense that I've had someone else reach out to me. He's in court as well at the moment for a separate matter, which divulge any information on. But suppose it's knowing that, you have a chance of success. Obviously, that needs to be a genuine claim. This doesn't sort of create, open season necessarily. It has to be legitimate, of course, and mine couldn't have been any more legitimate. Like everything, I was stunned a little bit. I had two people give me some help and advice, but even they were both sort of not standoffish, but they, basically their gut was my argument that a binding agreement existed wasn't the strongest. So when the judge said, I agree with the claimant, a binding agreement had been established, I was like, Christ, happy days. And then to get the we call it the damages, all that money back as well. And I was like, so I thought to myself, they're being, or them being solicitors, lawyers in the case they put forward, I was like, crikey, I may not get any money. I might get the judgment, but I may not get any money. And then so when I, for a minute, and this is the problem with working away, a 3-hour drive to work, there were moments when I thought to myself, yep, absolutely dead set. Your case couldn't be stronger. You're a shoe and it's in the bag. And then an hour later, be like, you're a dead duck, mate. How did you miss the meeting? Obvious. So it's been horrible driving to and from work. At start and end of each week. So you're in between thinking I'm in and then I'm not the next one. But I forgot where I was going with that.
That's okay. One of the things that struck me with this, I mean, obviously you've got the financial thing of, can you afford to lose court costs and various other bits and pieces? You're also going into bat against, trained barristers or solicitors, whatever it might be. So that's a consideration. Did it ever cross your mind how this might potentially have a black mark against your name in the wider industry? He's that bloke that took Flannery's to court.
And I don't care, Mark. I really don't care. And this, for construction, but any employer. As it stands, I'm probably, my sort of documented learners' journals and videos I posted over the winter. I think another one you may have mentioned or referred to about having to return home to sort of support my wife and child. I need a job, but I don't need this job necessarily. If the environment's wrong, if it's toxic, you don't want me. I don't want to be there. If I have to, jump through hoops, I just, it's what are they got? If it costs you your mental health, it costs too much, sort of thing. I don't want to go to work and play games. Like even the expression, people say, "Oh, I've been in this game all my life." My job is in the game. I go to work. We all go to work to earn money, right? Put food on the table, support our family. I take what I do seriously. I don't take myself seriously. And so, never mind construction. But a couple of the last office jobs I went for interviews for. One person asked me quite a cliche question. They said, what can you tell us about our company? I can regurgitate what I read on your website last night if you want me to. But what is that bring? I'm a little bit unconventional, and so people don't want to work with me. Well, that saved me, half the battle of having to determine whether I want to work with you or not. If me being sort of quite frank is too much, I can live with that. I want to go to work. I want to do a job, and I don't want additional drama. I don't think anyone's drama, do they? So they'd move job.
Given all that you've been through, and given the fact that you do have a different set of skills up your sleeve should you need them, are you still committed to construction? Do you see your long term still in the industry?
Yeah, I'd like to think so, Mark, because as I said earlier, I really do love, love, at the moment, I really love bulldozing. It's brilliant. And everybody thinks I've got a bit of OCD. I just, maybe I'm a perfectionist or something, but I like trying to get sharp edges and tracking those little crumbs. And even on a dig, there's a little rock, I want, got to be perfect sort of thing. I love being in the seat. When I was sort of first coming up on the digger, I used to look at, through the hot shots and I'd watch them, copy them, emulate them, speak to them, and ultimately my goal was to compete with them, right? Like that. Because I'm just I'm a person by nature. So I wouldn't like for the last, coming up 6 years now, to have been a waste, all that sort of traveling around and really running around the country, to have been for nothing. So while our child and nursery, I might have to step aside, go back to an office job perhaps. But thankfully these tickets, probably the positive of them, they last for 5 years, I think it is. So renew them in October, and then come back in a few years' time maybe, or do it part time. As you say, it's nice to have options, and I suppose probably to go into bat for people who work in the office in this industry. A lot of guys would say, "Oh, these paper pushers don't know what they're doing." I could do that. Well, working in an office brings with it its own sort of set of skills and challenges. For one, you can't be so coarse, I suppose. You got to be a bit more diplomatic, and ultimately,
I work in my office. That's the only reason you're saying no.
Yeah, no, it's a different skill set, right? And you see, I don't just see, you probably noticed it too, a lot of, I don't know, middle-aged guys that have been in construction their whole lives, starting to realise that their body won't last forever, and they're looking to make that transition into the office now, which is great. They take that experience with them, and arguably that's, that's why you mentioned before, I come across your writing is just, you really do have your finger on the pulse. The industry is so short of experience, and not just on machines, not just on tools, but in the office as well. I used to what's the word? Sort of, not despised, but I didn't like being sent home because I was inexperienced. And then when I got a bit more experience and I knew what I was doing and I could talk around a site and I knew what was happening on site, whereas, 3 years prior, I had no idea what anyone else was doing because I had my own head up my own arse trying to figure out what I was trying to do. And now I can look at a site and think to myself, it's not the operators that are the issue, it's management, the poorly run. Now, look, the other side of that coin is who's responsible for delays, right? So a delay is created. Yeah, it's a management issue, but it might be another contractor, something falling over somewhere. I have quite a wide lens on things. I'm quite sort of sympathetic and understanding. But at the same time, if it's all right to send an inexperienced operator home because they can't keep up, is that same approach being applied to office staff who are causing God knows how much, tens of thousands of pounds of wasted diesel, just, machines idling, wages, because things aren't happening, because something's gone wrong. I don't want people to lose their jobs, but, it just, something has to change, right?
Totally agree. I mean, given all that we've said, and we've said, and I'm not talking specifically Flannery here, I'm just talking about the industry in general. You will not be the first, and you certainly won't be the last to have been treated the way that you were. It's probably happening to somebody literally as we speak right now. What would your advice be? Would you go through this again? Would you jump through the hoops? Would you go and represent yourself? Would you encourage others to do that?
Yeah. This question might get asked of me. I would looking back. What scares me? What scared me was the unknown, because I'd never done this before. And like anything, if you haven't done something before, you don't know what to do, right? And it's not like I had colleagues or friends to call on. I was essentially, I didn't qualify for legal aid. I was just outside of that bracket by a few £100. I rang around law firms, trying to get some pro bono help. Went out to the Lighthouse, and they were great. They managed to, so part of their offering, they can arrange an hour's consultation call. So, sorry, something's just fallen over. So it's not legal advice necessarily, or sort of representation, but it was an hour's time, which is better than nothing. So going through it and not knowing what to do was what sort of daunted me. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, don't get anything wrong. So I was more sort of, a lot of my Google searching was the process itself. And then having to write up documents and format for court, and thinking that, I didn't know, is there one sort of template you should use, or does it not matter? But all these little things, by evidence in my case, it is, that was what it was, right? Like I knew how I was going in to argue. I knew that the argument I was making, following the court processes, and a good example is, it was late in the process when I was Googling something to do with the hearing. I stumbled upon this purely coincidentally, and I'm really lucky I did, but I didn't send a letter before action at the beginning, at the outset. So although I'd said, I'd warned them, I'd said, I'd like to give you the opportunity to make it right, otherwise I'm going to put more claims. That's hard for me to say. Again, I don't work in law, but had I not stumbled across this letter before action, and I realised that on a Thursday, working away from home, so as soon as I got home Friday night, that I've got in the post first thing Saturday morning to arrive Monday morning. And as soon as the hearing started, I did, I just want to sort of make the call to where I think I missed a step, and explained, the steps I'd taken to make it right. And that ultimately sort of served me well. I think in summing up, the judge referenced that and said, I look at the two parties, I can see the claimant's done everything practical and within a reasonable time frame, and whereas by contrast, sort of paraphrasing it, by contrast, you sort of draw things out a little bit. But yeah, I would encourage people to stand up for themselves. It is daunting, and obviously I'm happy to provide my advice and sort of share what I learned throughout it. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice, but I can talk you through the processes I went through. But even witness statements, supply me witness statements, which I ultimately didn't use because I read somewhere that they may potentially be called into court, and I didn't want them being dragged out of work to drive hours, and cause that inconvenience to them. So I sort of potentially, to the detriment of my claim, didn't upload those, didn't supply those statements to the court. So things like that, Mark, I would encourage people to stand up. Obviously, look, you have to realise, as I did, as I found out, you potentially may end up on the hook for some of their costs. So you sort of have to, if you believe, if it's happened to you and you believe in the strength of your claim and you've got enough evidence, I'll lend a hand to it where I can, based on what I've learned. But and so, it can be quite daunting. But I would.
Would a union have helped?
Hard to say. I reached out to a union. I reached out to Scottish Owners Association, writing to my local MP. I reached out to a mutual well-known industry contact who had a sort of direct access to someone influential within that organisation. The union couldn't help because, one, I wasn't a member, and even if I were to join or were to have joined, they can't help with retrospective matters. So I can't say whether they would have helped. I suppose, the question sort of, have unions represented anyone in this in the past, and then that would probably be the answer, I suppose. I said, tried reaching out to several organisations, tried to extend olive branches through mutual industry contacts, and I was very much on my own on this occasion.
This is going to happen more, I would imagine. We have, I've been around this game for a long, long time. And when I started, everybody was directly employed, and people were being self-employed and going through agencies. And that seems to be a one-way street. It seems more and more people are being pushed down that line, which, opens up the opportunity for this to happen to more people.
Yeah, 100%. There was a guy, I think he's the founder of an agency, a foundation personnel, Will James, I think his name is. He made a post today talking about that sort of very topic. And, I think the post had been up for somewhere about an hour, and there were already about a dozen comments, people talking about, that the amounts paid for digs accommodation gets you bugger all. The standard of accommodation you can get for the money being paid just isn't worth it. And these are all guys, by and large, some of them are familiar faces, names and faces, and I know that they've been around the industry most of their whole adult life. So if they're saying this, and that's sort of one of the other things that sort of shaped my approach to things. I'm as opinionated as the rest of us, but yes, I have an opinion. But I sort of, when I see guys that have been doing this their whole adult life, making points, and they're still not listened to, what's my 2 cents going to do? I've only been, as I said, I've only been at this for 5.5, coming up 6 years. If they're not listening to the guys that have been doing it their whole life, well, why are they going to listen to me? As you say, this won't be the last time it happens. As as I said at the outset, when I wanted to put that post up saying, hopefully it's a precedent. Something else I learned is small claims cases don't set precedents, but I'm sure it can't. If someone were to happen, happen upon the same circumstances as me, well, surely it just means for that person, they go, right, well, I know this exact same thing happened to that bloke. If I put a small claim in, I wouldn't want to say 100% guaranteed, but, I'm 99% likely to get a favourable outcome. So, sadly, the reality is, though, Mark, I don't want to mention names, but someone else I know quite well is owed money for a week's work. Fortunately, they got a lot going on in their life too, and it's probably a write-off at this point. You just, that's probably sort of a side topic to this, is the number of debt collectors that are sort of gaining popularity on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've noticed them, but there's a guy called Peter O'Hara. He's from Liverpool, absolutely brutal. Rowan Hay, Adam Highway. There's all these guys, gaining a bit of a following on LinkedIn, doing very well for themselves because of people who won't pay the bills. Now, I know, this wasn't a bill necessarily, but, it still talks to the point about, the state of the industries, and when people can just start a business, run up credit on suppliers' account, not pay them, go bust, and then start up a new company under a new name on Monday. Like, there's so many things wrong, but, and with all these industry bodies, nothing can get done. It's just, but yet they're all spouting the welfare of the workforce nonsense. Is that, and that's ultimately service to me.
I've got one final question, because I'm sure you've got an evening to have. Will you ever go back for the Flannery experience?
No, absolutely not. I sort of mulled that one over, and will I be the better man and all that? No, there's absolutely no chance. There's no trust, right? And even now, like you said before, about a target on my back, or a black mark on my name, absolutely, having received that judgment money today, who's to say I'll go to work for them in a few years' time, and then I get with a bogus, you damaged our machinery claim, right? I just, no, I'm done. Absolutely no chance.
That is perfect, sir. That was good. Really good. I'll spend a day or two going through and editing that and making it look as pretty as I can. I'll have a bit of a play around with the sound as well. Make sure you're coming through loud and clear and crisp and everything. But I mean, the story tells itself. It's really good.
Good, Mike. Yeah, I mean, as I say, exactly right. Like that's we'll put that claim in, and then ultimately when I ended up in court, I just, there seemed to be like a light bulb moment where the judge understood the angle. I felt like he understood what I was arguing, because when I read their defense, they were trying to substitute themselves as defendant for their umbrella company, saying we don't write the contract between. Well, but there's no contract between us and operatives. We don't work like that. We use our umbrella company for that. And I was like, well, yeah, I know how the process works. I've been living in there for the last 6 years, but we still, the way it all works. Your name on the machines. It was you who posted the advert. It was your guy I spoke to. I had no contact from anyone else at this umbrella company, and it was your guy who sent me there. Maybe these assurances, and ultimately, the elements of the binding agreement, there was an offer, acceptance, legal capacity, and something else. They were all there within the text messages. That I said to the judge, if you swap that around, I said the process doesn't work, and neither of those two businesses have a business. I said, this payroll company, I'm damn sure don't own a single piece of plant, and I know by their own witness statement they don't advertise jobs. That's not the business they're in. I said the way it works is, you advertise, so you make an agreement with people from the public who are adequately trained and qualified, and that you're happy to proceed with, So what are it's called an invitation to treat, a job advertisement, an invitation to treat. But the only people that are going to apply for those jobs are people who are trained and competent and who you're happy with. So you say, right, we'll pay you X for your services. And then as long as you're happy and everyone, both parties are happy, then you pass our details on to them to progress. That then it goes from an invitation to treat to essentially a binding offer. I said to the judge, I'm arguing the fact that they cost me money because they basically sent me to an induct and I was never guaranteed to be able to split. And he agreed and he said, yeah, exactly right. And, he understood.
I guess that's another challenge. And again, this is not for the actual podcast itself, but every time somebody goes through this, you've got to teach a new judge how this system works. Regardless of the fact that this is rife, I don't suppose that a judge is going to be dealing with more than one of these in the entire career. So unless somebody has got your eloquence and has bothered to do the Googling and the chat GPT, it's going to be hard for a judge to understand the sort of machinations of this industry, isn't it?
Yeah, and he as much said so. He said, obviously I'm not from this industry, I'm just trying to figure it out. And so I had to sort of explain to him the business model, because their solicitor, or the one that turned up on the day, she asked me a question because she got the opportunity to cross-examine me, and I thought I'd had the opportunity to cross-examine them, but that didn't work out to be the case. And one question she asked was, well, you knew that Flannery used Guild Commercial, don't you? And I said, no. I said that they could use anyone. I said, but, I've worked for companies in the past who do pay you direct. I said, but ultimately, companies like Flannery, they're the ones they set the infrastructure. I said, I'm just one of about 500,000 self-employed subbies who have to work under the structure that you guys create. And I think I even said to the judge, I said, in all honesty, Judge, I agree with everything they've said. That the two witnesses from, because it was Patrick Flannery, the son, who's the MD, I think, and some of HR guy from their umbrella company. But ultimately, some of their witness statements was ultimately what sunk the case. They tried to character assassinate me, but they took bringing these LinkedIn posts into the frame, saying, you know how it works, like you've even said in your own post. And all of those posts demonstrate is me working within the parameters that the industry has set. I said, all the posts there shows with me going to work and then deciding not to give any notice because I don't have to go and take up another job because it's paying more or it's closer to home. But I haven't actually breached any contract, the likes of which I brought you here for today.
Fair play to you. Fair play to you, sir. Right. I'm going to let you get on with your evening. I want to go and pick my son up from squash and then get a bite to eat. As I say, I'll probably work on this over the weekend, I would imagine. I'll blast it over to you before I put it out. And I think that we'll also be able to get a few shorts out of it, to drop on social media and stuff like that. So, really get rid of it.
I was going to ask how you'd sort of planned on using it, because obviously people don't want to, I think, monotone after a while. So I just said about 50 minutes of recording. So I was interested how you were going to use it. So
I'll probably take several bites of it. I mean, just very quickly. I mean, I'll probably do the whole thing and have that available should somebody want to watch it. I'll have some shorts, but what I'll probably do is try to remember to wear the same shirt and the same hat again, and I'll kind of present it and then throw over to you for the answers. And then we'll take the snippet. So one way or another, we'll put it everywhere, basically.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, go for gold. I appreciate your support too, Mark. Thank you for reposting that and said your kind words on the show. I don't always get. I'm not always logged into the full show because bloody signal change will come on a call or the boss comes over. But I've got a couple of mentions you've made. So thanks for your support and appreciate the opportunity to come and talk.
Not a problem at all, mate. Well, you look after yourself. Give your little one a big hug for me, and I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Mark. Take care. Have a good evening. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, buddy. Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.